A single vote in the U.S. Senate can freeze the most powerful government on Earth. But right now, a political standoff threatens to blow up the rules forever.
Yeah, we are watching the
fundamental
operation
machinery of
just
American
seized
lawmaking
enough fentanyl to kill 70 million people.
Halt.
And it all started with a simple
cryptocurrency
transfer
is
from a
about
small
to become
town
very
in Ohio.
real.
Right. I mean,
so
it
let's
is
set the
just
scene.
an absolutely
It's March
staggering amount of
2026.
poison.
Yeah.
And
Picture the
tracing
hallways
that
of the
one
United
digital
States
thread
Capitol right now.
really unravels
AIDS
exactly
are
how the
literally
modern,
military
highly
style
organized
cops into
global
back
drug
offices.
trade actually
Oh, yeah.
operates today.
Staffers
It
are
really
stockpiling energy drinks.
So we
by
have
the
a
case.
massive
Exactly.
news hook
We are
for you
looking at a
today, and
scenario
we're
where
just gonna
senators
jump
might
right
actively
into it.
refuse to
In the
drink
next
water
90
just so they don't have
seconds
to
or
leave the
so,
floor to use
you
the
need to know
restroom.
about
Which is
Operation
wild, and
Boxcutter.
it's all because the
Basically,
Senate
the
is
FBI,
completely
Homeland
deadlocked
Security,
over
and the
Save
Justice
the
Department
America
just
Act.
Right, that big
executed this
election
historic,
overhaul bill.
totally
It's centered around
unprecedented
measures like
takedown
voter
of the
ID
global
requirements.
synthetic drug
Democrats
supply
are
chain.
aggressively
and they
blocking
didn't
this
just arrest a few
legislation,
local corner
and
dealers
Republicans
here.
desperately
No, not
want
at all.
to
They
pass
went
it.
right to the top.
But they lack
We're
the
talking
60
about
votes
indictments
required to
against
break the stalemate.
dozens of Chinese
Which means
nationals,
frustrations are just
executives
boiling
of four
over.
major pharmaceutical
Today,
companies.
you have
Wow.
28
And
Republican
even
senators,
key
people like Pete
U.S.
Ricketts and
citizens who are
Cynthia
operating
Lummis,
as these domestic
demanding that the
It
Senate
represents a
force a
fundamental shift in
grueling,
strategy.
physical,
Right, because
talking
law
filibuster.
enforcement is
They
no
wanna
longer
force
just
Democrats
to
to
stand on the floor
streets.
and talk
They are
until their vocal
targeting
cords
the
just give
international
out. And if that
chemical
fails, they
suppliers
want to
right
break
at
the
the
standing
source.
rules of the Senate
Exactly.
entirely
And they are hitting the
to force
Mexican
a final
cartels
vote.
with
And the real shocker
hardcore
dropped
terrorism
just a
charges,
few days
which is
ago.
huge.
Senator John
It's
Cornyn,
massive.
a
Over
man
the
who
course of this
fiercely defended
operation,
the old
they
Senate
seized
rules for his entire career,
hundreds of thousands
just
of pounds
published
of
this
chemicals out
fiery
on the high
op-ed.
seas.
Right, saying
This is the
Republicans must
biggest
act now
bust
to
of
get
its
this
kind
bill
in
passed.
history.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
said
it
they had to
completely
deal a fatal
rewrites
blow
the
to the
legal
rules,
playbook on how
which instantly
authorities
triggered a
actually
massive
fight
public
the
call
drug
out from
crisis
former
that
Senator
is,
Joe Manchin.
devastating
Manchin
communities all
slammed
across the country.
Cornyn online
It's a total
for,
game changer.
well,
For
a massive
decades, the
flip-flop.
focus
Because
was
the rules of the
entirely
Senate
on
are
the finished
quite
product,
literally
right?
hanging
Like
by
the
a thread
actual
right now.
bricks
I
of
mean, the
narcotics
decisions made in
crossing
the next
physical
few days will
border.
dictate
Right,
how American
exactly.
laws are written
But
for the
Operation
next century.
Boxcutter, welcome to this
Changes
deep
that
dive.
paradigm by going
Today,
straight into
we
the
have a
corporate
custom
offices
mission
and the
tailored
factory
just
floors
for you.
overseas.
So,
We're
for
going
you
to
listening right
explore
now,
the
our mission today is
swashbuckling,
to take our
pirate-filled
stack of
origins
sources,
of the
which
filibuster.
includes
It is a
unsealed court
crazy
indictments,
It
press
really is.
conferences, diplomatic
We'll also break down
statements,
the
and think tank
terrifying
analysis,
parliamentary weapon
and map
known
out
as the
exactly how
nuclear
this
option.
global pipeline
And finally,
operates.
we will
Right,
unpack
we wanna really
a
break down the whole
mind-bending
network.
mathematical
Yeah, and
concept
we're going to
called
explore
the
the new
Manchin
legal weapons
paradox.
being
Right,
used to
which
fight
proves
it,
exactly
and, of
why
course,
politicians
the very
use
complicated
gridlock as a highly
geopolitical clash
calculated
happening behind the scenes.
mathematical
Okay, let's unpack
strategy.
this.
So,
Well, to
by
really
the end of this
grasp
conversation,
how authorities
you will
stop this
hold the
massive
secret
network,
decoder ring
we first
for the
need to look
chaos
at
you see on the news.
how the drugs
You will
actually
understand the
travel.
hidden
Right.
game
like
theory
how they get from
that drives
overseas
these
labs to
high-stakes
American
showdowns.
streets.
Absolutely.
Okay,
You have to
let's
realize
unpack this.
this operates
Before we can
exactly
truly
like a
grasp
Fortune
the
500
physical
company
threats and the
supply chain.
massive stakes
Except it
of
deals
this
in
2026
Exactly,
LGBT
it deals in
America
death.
Act standoff.
And the sheer scale
We
of
really
the
need to look at what the
logistics here is
filibuster
just
actually
mind-blowing.
is.
I
And
want to
more
look
importantly,
at the
how it
specific
started.
details from
Right,
that recent
because it
seizure
wasn't
down in
designed this
Houston.
way
Oh,
by
yeah,
the
the
founders,
Houston
right?
one.
Right.
Like this
Authorities
wasn't in the
intercepted
blueprint.
Not at all.
1,300
If you read the
barrels
US
of
Constitution,
chemicals
you
that
will
were
not
heading
find the word
straight to the
filibuster
Sinaloa
anywhere in the
Cartel.
text.
But
Well,
like,
nowhere.
how do you
Nowhere.
even move
The Constitution
1,300
basically
barrels
gives
of
the
illegal
Senate the
chemicals
authority to set its
across
own
an
internal
ocean
rules.
without tipping
So
off
back in
customs?
1789,
Well, they
during
use the
very
exact
first
same
sessions,
maritime
debates
shipping
ended with
infrastructure
just
that
a
brings us our
simple majority
smartphones
vote.
and clothes.
Okay,
Just
so
blending right in.
51
Yeah,
votes
use these
and you're
massive
done.
cargo ships,
Exactly.
Complex
there
shell
was this
companies and
massive
fraudulent
loophole.
shipping manifests
They never
to
codified
basically
a specific
bury these
procedure to
barrels
force a vote
among
to
thousands
happen
of
if
legitimate
someone
shipping
simply
containers.
refused to stop
To give you a
talking.
visual on the volume, it actually
So without
take
a mechanism to cut off
24
debate,
18-wheeler semi-trucks
politicians figured out
just
they
to
could
move
just,
those 1,300
hold the
barrels
floor
from the
hostage.
porch.
They did.
24
We actually have
semi-trucks. That
diaries
is
from the
a
very first
massive
session of the
industrial
Senate.
scale operation.
Pennsylvania
It really
Senator
is.
William
And the
McClay
statistics
wrote down
inside
his sheer
those barrels are
frustration that
terrifying.
senators
They
from
found
Virginia were intentionally talking away the
pounds
clock.
of benzyl
Just to make sure a
alcohol.
specific bill
And over
couldn't pass.
330,000
They
pounds
literally
of another
weaponized the
chemical.
clock.
I mean, if
But
they were
let's
holding
just
the
pause on the
legislative
benzyl
process
alcohol for a
hostage,
second.
makes perfect
Why
sense
are
why the press
cartels
eventually started
importing
calling them
hundreds of
pirates.
thousands of pounds of
Which
that
brings us to
specific
the
liquid?
actual
So
word
benzyl alcohol is what we
filibuster.
call a
Yeah,
precursor
it's easily
chemical.
one of the
On its
strangest
own,
words
it's
in
just a
American
common
politics.
industrial
So where
salt.
does it
You
come
can
from?
find it in paint thinner,
The etymology
in certain
is
soaps.
fascinating,
just
honestly.
everyday
The
stuff.
term
Yeah,
really
totally
took hold in the
legitimate stuff.
1850s.
But in the
It
hands of
comes
a
from
cartel
the Dutch
chemist,
word
it is a crucial
"rebuiter"
building block.
and the Spanish word
Through a series of chemical
filibustero.
reactions,
which
they use it to
translates directly
synthesize
to
freebooter
P2P,
or pirate, which is
right?
the core
Yes.
ingredient needed to manufacture
Specifically,
massive
the
quantities
mercenaries and pirates who
Methamphetamine.
raided
Wow.
Caribbean
Wow, and the
islands and
yield
Latin
on that
American
is
countries
staggering.
during that era.
of meth. So they were
If
calling
those
these
specific
distinguished
barrels in
senators
Houston
pirates.
had actually reached
Pretty
the
much.
cartel labs in
The
Mexico,
term entered the
the
political
indictment notes they
lexicon
could have
because
produced
observers recognized the
420,000
behavior.
pounds of meth.
Senators
It's
who talked for
That is
hours
roughly
were literally hijacking the
$569
Senate
million
floor.
worth
Like
of
taking the
product on
government
street.
hostage, just like a
From
pirate
one
taking over
intercepted
a ship.
shipment.
Yeah, just one.
Oh.
So let's
And it's
track
not
how the
just the
Senate
base
tried to
precursor
fight off
chemicals
these
either.
legislative
These overseas
pirates.
companies also sell
Because as
what
the
are known
country
as
grew,
cutting agents.
I mean, you
Right,
couldn't
I
just have
saw
one
that in the
person shut down the the entire government for
particularly alarming one
No,
they
you
seized
couldn't.
in this
But it
operation.
took a long time
is
to build a
called
defense.
By the
methamphetamine.
early 20th century, these
Methamphetamine, that's an
marathon
animal
speeches became
tranquilizer, right?
catastrophic
But why
for a
use that?
modernizing
Like, why not
nation.
just sell
I can
pure
imagine.
fentanyl?
It
So
really
finally,
just
in
comes down to basic
1917,
economics and
President Woodrow
biology.
Wilson pushed the
Methamphetamine is a
Senate to
synthetic
adopt
drug
Rule
used in
22.
veterinary medicine.
This
and it is
rule created a
incredibly
formal
dangerous for
process called
humans.
I can
closure.
imagine.
It drastically
okay.
drops your heart rate.
Which is simply
It's
a
actually up
mechanism
to
to
200
force an
times
end to
more
debate.
powerful than
But
morphine.
here's the
200
catch.
times.
It required
Yeah.
a massive
Cartels use
two-thirds
it because
majority
it
vote to
exponentially
trigger.
extends their
Wow.
yield,
Which is an incredibly
They can
steep
take
hill
a
to
tiny
climb.
amount of
So
pure
stiff
fentanyl,
that over the
mix
next
it
4
with
decades,
bulk amounts
the
of this
Senate
cheap
only managed to
tranquilizer,
successfully
and
invoke
basically
cloture
multiplied their
5
product
times.
tenfold.
And
That
make
is
way more
wild.
money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Southern
Plus,
senators
it creates
famously
a
used this
specific,
exact tool
highly
to block
addictive
civil rights
blackout
legislation
high
for years.
that keeps buyers
The
coming
gridlock
back,
grew so
even though it
intense that in
dramatically increases the
1975,
risk of a
the Senate
fatal
lowered that
overdose.
threshold from
So, if
two-thirds
I'm
down
trying
to
to picture
60
this whole
out of the
system,
100
it's really
total
not like the
senators.
old days of
Ah,
a cartel
okay.
growing
And that 60
illicit
vote
crops up
threshold
in the
is the
mountains.
number that
Not at all.
dominates our
It's honestly
politics
less
today.
like farming and more
But
like,
here's where I
don't
think a
know,
lot of people
a
get
dark web
confused.
version of baking
When
a
we
cake.
hear the
You
word
aren't buying the
filibuster,
finished cake.
we don't just
You're
think of
buying
a
the
60
flour,
vote
the
math
sugar,
problem.
and the baking
We picture
instructions
Jimmy
from an
Stewart
overseas
and Mr.
supplier.
Smith
That is a
goes to
highly
Washington.
accurate way to
Right,
look
the
at it.
classic
In the
movie
corporate world,
scene.
they call it
We
just-in-time
picture
global
single person
manufacturing.
standing at a podium, reading
The
the phone
cartels
book,
source their
sweating,
raw components
refusing to sit
globally,
down.
assemble the
But
final
senators
drug in
rarely
Mexican
do that
super
anymore.
labs,
Why don't
and
they
then
have to
use
physically
distribution
talk
networks
today?
in the U.S.
That is a
And the
crucial
suppliers
piece of
know
the puzzle.
exactly what they're
so
doing.
in the
Oh,
1970s,
absolutely.
the
They
Senate
run these
created
sleek,
something called the
professional-looking
two-track
websites
system.
that appear to be
How did that work?
totally
Well,
legitimate
before the
chemical
system,
suppliers.
a filibuster stopped
But they
all
are
Senate business
knowingly
completely.
shipping
Nothing else
these
could happen.
specific
The
raw
Senate
ingredients
realized they had a whole country to
cartel
run, so
fronts.
they changed
Which
the
brings up a
procedure.
massive
Makes sense.
logistical hurdle.
Under the
How
new
on
system,
earth are
if
they
a senator
paying for
simply
all of
threatened
this?
to filibuster a
The
bill,
cartels make
the Senate
billions of
leadership
dollars,
would just
but they
set that
obviously
controversial
aren't
bill
shipping
aside on a
giant
different track
pallets
and
of
move on
physical
to
cash
ash across the
business.
Pacific
Oh,
Ocean
wow.
on a boat.
So they made it
No,
painless.
the financial
You
mechanics
didn't have
are
to stand
incredibly
up and
modern.
destroy your
Let's
vocal
look at that
cords
case
anymore.
where
You
you
just
just
send
sent
an
an
email
email
saying,
Yeah, let's talk about
I
Eric
object,
Kane.
and
Right.
the bill
So
was
according to
frozen.
federal indictment,
Like a
he
silent
was acting
filibuster.
as a
You
primary
capture the
domestic
dynamic
supplier.
perfectly.
He was
The
ordering
physical
these
endurance
bulk cutting
requirement
agents
basically
and distributing them to drug
But the physical
traffickers
records
throughout
from
southern
before and
Ohio.
outside that silent system,
When it was time to pay his
those
overseas
remained
suppliers,
pretty legendary.
he didn't
Oh,
use
absolutely.
a bank wire.
Strom
He and
Thurmond
his
spoke
associates
against the
sent
Civil
over
Rights Act in
$60,000 in
1957
cryptocurrency
for 24 hours
directly
in
to
each
Imagine
Chinese
finding
digital
out
wallets
you're
in
only
4
crippled.
hours.
Of course.
And the modern
Secretly funded
individual
How does that
reference
actually work in
massive
practice?
spending addiction.
Don't law enforcement
It does.
agencies
In
know how
April
shocking
2025,
They do.
Booker
Which
spoke
is why
for
these
an
networks use
astonishing
the magic
25
second
hours
that
and
you
5
use
minutes
or mixing.
against the policies
Yeah.
of the
And
Donald
the
Trump
buyers in Ohio
administration.
don't just
I mean,
send
just think
$40
about the
directly to the
blocking
seller.
reality of
The funds are
25
sent
hours.
through
Digital
digital
money was
mixing
cannot
services
fixing
that
illegal
break the
gambling
transaction
on
into
your desk.
thousands
You can't even
of
leave
tiny
the chamber
micro
for a
transactions.
bathroom
Oh,
break.
so
It
it's
is a
scattered.
brutal
Exactly.
It's an
bounces them
existential
all
crisis
across
for the
various
House.
blockchain
Exactly.
networks to
Scramble
scramble
the
the trail,
trail really reminds
and then
me of
reassembles the
NASCAR
funds
racing
in a wallet
who decides to
hosted
just
overseas
bills
exchange.
filing
Wow.
emergency
So what do you
brake,
do?
throwing
Digital
everyone
money
else
isn't
into the
happening
walls
just
just
because
Take
they
that
don't
money,
like the
pay off
final
the credit
destination.
suppliers.
It is a
Don't worry,
highly
this is
disruptive
fine.
maneuver.
The
Right.
indictments
Wait, that
show
raises
the
a glaring
Chinese
question,
nationals
though.
soliciting
If this
U.S.
rule
buyers
is
on
always
encrypted
universally
messaging apps,
disruptive,
arranging
every
the
car
deals
is a majority
and
party
providing the
self-inflicted
exact
hates at
secure
$1.5
crypto-wallet addresses to
billion.
send the
Why
funds.
haven't they just
State
voted to
budget
destroy it? If
Completely
these are
avoid
just
that
raw
is the
mass
core
chemicals.
Welcome to
tension
the deep
of the
dive.
United
Cartels
States
know
Senate.
exactly
Today we're
what to
exploring
do.
The
a
reason
classic
the
case
filibuster
of
is
just
raw
a
and
sleight of
that's
hand
criminally
coming out of
extreme
the
cartels know
We
exactly
are
so
looking at the
extreme
strategic
and so
energy killing
disruptive to the
fund. The
institution
Chinese suppliers
that it earned
actively
a
provide the
terrifying
Mexican
nickname.
cartels
pot of
their
money
option
with
and
special
Exactly.
save the
The
environment.
nuclear
Formulas and
option.
processes
Turning
of
into a
Cold
hidden
War
Wait,
threats.
they're actually
Let's
giving
walk
them the
through the
recipe for
actual floor mechanics.
Like, if I buy the cake
How does
in
a
Maryland,
party
they are
actually
sending me the
launch this
instruction
weapon?
center of a
Okay,
huge
let's break down the
political
parliamentary
parliamentary
chief.
You've
The
got a
indictments
Democratic
reveal that these
governor,
chemical
frustrated
companies provide
environmentalist,
technical
making
rules
some
of the
very
Senate
awkward
requires
They
compromises.
teach the
overwhelming
cartel
and
chemists
conservative critics
exactly
who
how
are
to
rightly
implement
calling
a
this
highly
whole thing a
polarized
shell
modern
game.
politics
to
to
maximize their
securing
funding.
when you look at the
67
documents we have
votes.
today,
Horrifying.
it's a
Basically
full-service,
mathematical
vertically
rules.
integrated
Exactly.
criminal
So
operations.
they found a back
They know
really
exactly
hard
what their
backdoor.
chemicals
Yeah,
are
backdoor
used.
that bypasses
And
the
because
follow
the
the
money
supply chain is so
always
advanced
follow
and
the
so
money.
decentralized.
We are going
Here
to
is
see
it
how
explains why the
funds
old
designed to
strategy
fight
of
climate
arresting
change
street-level
is
dealers
being
was
used
first,
to
the
plug
Senate
holes
majority
but the
leader
FBI
stands
literally
up,
will dig
calls
into
the
and
arguments
raises
that
that
this
line of
isn't
order.
found money at
You're
all.
right,
Based
one
on the
dealer
dealer
tells
presiding
the
officer
officer
that
more
the written rule
Let's get
remains
right into it.
entirely
The
pumping out
strategic
than
energy
millions of
investment
dollars.
exactly.
So the majority leader basically
very
stands
important.
up
So
and claims
to
that
stop the
guise.
decentralized
Well,
global
essentially,
network,
on paper.
then
Then
the
the
presiding officer
completely
looks from
changed
the
the
legal
legal
book and
book.
says,
They had
no,
no
your
choice.
point of
The
order
drug
is
networks
Maryland
were
energy.
evolving
The text
faster
says
than
what
the
its
law,
whole stated
which is the
purpose
only
is to
logical
reduce
holdout, the
energy
heaviest
bills,
legal
but
hammer
here
they
is the
have.
and fund
Terrorism
majority leader
charges,
immediately
like
appeals to
solar
ruling
panels
official.
officially designated major
Exactly.
trafficking
Senate
groups.
procedure.
But here is the
Specifically
deciding
the Sinaloa
appeal
Cartel and the
only
Gulf
requires
Cartel
a simple
as foreign
majority of the
terrorist
money
organizations,
actually
or
So
FTOs.
the majority
And we
party
really
they
aren't
aren't
just to
overtaxing
say what a
to
massive
override
share
if that is.
And the
No, and that's why
Operation
politicians
Bucky
absolutely
uses
love
this
it. It
they
feels
establish
safe.
a
So about 40%
designated
comes from
precedent
regional
file
carbon
completely
offsets.
overwrites terrorism
But the big
charges
chunk,
against
the one
chemical
growing like crazy,
suppliers.
that is
Right.
comes with something
We are
called
no longer
alternating
treating
cartels,
rewrite the
just
rules
like organized
using a
crime
simple
majority.
Yeah.
Which is just a
ignoring
fancy government
like
term for
ISIS
fine.
or Al-Qaeda. It's a fire
Yes,
failure.
and if
It's
you
like
look at the evidence in the
sitting down to play a
environmental law,
board game,
terrorism
and
labeling
right in the
companies
middle of a
rely
tight
on a
match,
certain
your
amount
team
of
decides to
specific
rewrite the
tests
instruction
for
manual
renewables
just because you happen to have one extra player at the table.
That's a great way to put
He
it.
didn't just
But
move
that
drugs.
guarantees
He essentially
retaliation.
ran an
Yeah,
armed
the moment
the other
military
team gets an
group for
extra
the
player,
Sinaloa
Utility
Cartel.
can
They're
just
going
pay
to
a fee.
rewrite the
Court
rules
documents
again.
detail how he was
And if we
actively
connect this
brokering
bigger
deals to
picture,
trade in
here's
you can see how this weapon has steadily
utilities
grown
are
and increasingly
in
just
tactical
paying the
area.
fine.
Every time a party
pushes
pushes
that
that
new
new
private
private
security
security
force,
part of the
control
so-
territory,
and the
and
retaliation
violently
just becomes
protect
more
the
incredible
cartel's
track that
operations.
escalation
Which is
force. When
exactly
this
what an
is
insurgency
done.
Well,
does.
the term itself
When
gained
a
traction
group
in
holds
2003
territory
with Senator
through armed
Precisely.
conflict
It
and
is
political
Senator Ted
intimidation,
Stevens previously called
it
it
crosses the line from
government
drug
made
trafficking
mandates so
into
aggressive
actual
and nuclear
terrorism.
stuff, and hitting them with terrorism laws just completely changes the mechanics. The first major launch happened in
Stats on this are just
2013.
staggering.
Democrats, the FTO
led by
label
Harry
allows
Reid,
U.S.
2022
frustrated
this
with
revenue is
Republican
suspect
suspect
assets
assets
anywhere
So
in
they
the
use the
global
nuclear
banking
option to
system.
drop
It
the
cuts off their
threshold
money.
to 51 votes, but more importantly, it allows them to use Interpol red notice.
But the explicit notices are critical to the
Right,
Supreme
so
Court.
now the
Right?
state
If a
has
chemical
this.
company
But 4
executive
years
is
later,
indicted in the U.S. but lives
2017, the balance of
overseas,
power
the
flipped.
U.S.
Green
might not be able to just
Republicans,
arrest
led
them.
by remember that
Right,
money
they
can't
can't
just
just
send
fall
the
out of the
FBI,
sky
and they
and
retaliated for that
Exactly.
2013 rule
But
change.
a red
So they
notice
fired
is
back.
a
Exact
global tripwire.
corporations they use the nuclear
If
option
that
to
indicted
vaporize
executive
that
takes
final
visits to
Supreme Court
Thailand,
They
section,
pass
pushing
every
through
patient
nominees
tendered
with
that
real
onto their
courses.
passports.
Exactly,
It's
it shows up
flagged.
right on your
Wow.
detained bill.
So you knew
suddenly
Sinaloa
everyday
Cartel
nominees
I
are
knew
paying for the
utilities
utilities
and that
failure
exact
to meet
cycle of
government
mutually
mandates.
assured
It reminds me of
destruction
how
brings us
launch
directly
money
back to the
finally
crisis
brought
at
down
hand today
phone.
in
Look at all
March
the tax we have
2026.
for the climate.
Right back to the
Which brings us
standoff
to the
over the
right.
Save
Mob
America
boss.
Act.
Right,
But
because that money is
traditional
definitely
murder
not
and
overhauled
bootlegging
past
laws
climate.
were
Democrats are
difficult
fiercely
anymore.
opposed to
Enter
the
Governor
silent
Wes
filibuster
Moore.
to freeze the
His
legislation.
administration
Now
is staring
Donald
down
Trump
drug
and those
rejected
28
one load
Republican
and
senators
$5
are
billion
hiding
They want to tear up that comfortable
They're
using
using
terrorism
billion.
laws to freeze them out.
You can't just
That is
ignore
exactly
all
what
what
they're
they're
doing.
doing. They found the
And when
lingering
government
vulnerability
overspends
and
the
forced
next
Democrats
street,
to
they
talk
start
until they
checking
collapse.
here's where it gets really
Or
interesting.
they want to
Let's
push
talk
the
about
nuclear button
dual
again
nature
and
of
kill the
couch
filibuster
provision
for
because a lot
legislation
of people might be
entirely.
wondering
In this current
if
crisis,
benzyl
highlights
alcohol
a
and
glaring
other
historical
So what's the actual
precursors are
proposal?
dangerous.
How
You brought
much
up
is
the
it?
the governor's plan
Senator
diverts $292
What's
million
fascinating is the
directly
underlying
from
warning
the
is
state
posted
into
op-ed
the state's
saying
general
Republicans
fund.
many
must
of these
allow
fatal
precursor
loaded
chemicals
Just to cover
have
their
complete
overspending.
illegitimate
Mansion
They
pointed out
are
hypothesis
using
in
energy
industrial
fines
noting
to
that Coyne
pay
used to
for
personally
general
thank him
government
for defending
operations.
that exact same
Bureaucracy,
classic
salaries,
rule.
office
Supporting
supplies, you
using
name it.
legitimate, but that's not even all of it.
Yeah.
Because I read in the
Clear,
sources there's also
undeniable
rebates.
pattern
They are not
emerges.
officially
Yes.
scheduled
This is
as
the part
illegal
critics are
controlled
calling a
substances.
political
Both parties
parties under
furiously
traditional
grabbing
another $100 million executive fund
soaring to
throw
get
their
their
one
hands up and say,
time
you know,
$40
we are a
rebate,
legitimate
cooling
business
business selling
selling
paint.
$40.
Right, it's all about traditional.
So let me get this straight.
It is not our
State
fault if
mandates
someone buys
drive up
one vote
energy
majority.
costs.
They
The
furiously
utility companies
attempt
pass
to
those
fill
massive
filibuster to
costs
ram
every
their
time
agenda
the U.S.
through.
government
Our bills
manages
go
to
up
officially
hundreds
ban
of dollars
parties
a year.
secretly want
Precursors
and then the
come
governor
on the
takes a
moment they
chunk of our
secure
own
money.
chemists, hands us back
do we
a
still
crisp
have it?
the
$40
That is the
bill,
million-dollar
and
question.
basically
Just
says,
invent a
let's
new
look
one.
at your margin in
That is the
2022. They
exact
start
math.
using a
It's
modern
wild.
Democrat
And if you look at the
ban
recent
chemical
supplemental
blistering
budget,
the
they're
exact
cutting
same
or
party
shifting another
to
$80
kill the
million.
filibuster
When you
and
add
make
all
it
this
pass
up,
off
this
voting
rate
range
depletes
and
the
regulatory
fund by
cap. But he
82%.
refused. By the time a chemical is
Wipe
banned, the
that.
cartels
Wipe
have
that.
gone
Leaving
from
only
aggressive
about
parties' goals
164
but
million
just
in
to
charge
protect
of
a
completely
60 vote
bypass the
procedural
need to
rule.
ban every
That is
single
not a
new
trend.
chemical variation.
That's a total politician willing by
And this
focusing
is where
charges
our
on
politics
the companies
is
are
super
selling
interesting.
to.
Well, the
Because
answer
it's
has very
terrorism,
little to do
environmentalists,
with blind
prosecutors
prediction
don't
or
dare
Senate
to prove
power.
that the chemical
It is actually
Climate
rooted
Action
in
Network.
If you knowingly
hard
sell
mathematical
illegal
facts.
industrial
They were.
solvent
Yeah.
to a
Initially,
This
designated
dynamic
terrorist,
is
when
brilliantly
this first
explained
fully
by
aware
they
they
called
would
it
use it to
unacceptable.
facilitate their
They said it was a
operations.
huge
You're providing
mistake to
material
use
support.
this
The
money
Mansion
as a
paradox.
petty
Okay,
action
push that
plan.
into the map. But then
So
they
they
fold
completely
it.
folded.
That is a
Now, they are
brilliant
actually
legal
supporting
strategy.
parts of the
But
government.
while the U.S.
spending
celebrates
models
these
to
new
talk about
legal
strange
but
swing
major
voter,
victories,
like a
Why on
moderate
earth would they do
operation
that?
right
If
in the
they
middle
truly
of
believe
involves
climate
citizens
change is an
and actually
existential
gains
crisis,
significantly
why
more
let the
power,
state
and
raise
that
the
creates a
survival
massive
fund?
diplomatic
It's just
capacity
raw
that
political
complicates
calculation.
Let's make
things.
this
If they know
concrete.
voters are
Now,
getting
we
Say
want
I'm the
frustrated by
Democratic
inflation and
leadership,
high energy.
and I
We are
want to pass a
striking
massive
partial
new
here.
spending
These
bill.
green groups
Let's
attack
say I
the
want to spend
$40
$10
beer simply
billion.
reporting
Even
the
if the
viewpoints
total
$10 billion. They look like they don't
It's
care about
important to look
working
at both
families. Now let's
perspectives
say
so they have to
Senator
understand
Manchin
why
is
this is
swallowing
such
a
a
very
issue.
bitter pill. He thinks $10
In
billion
exchange
so let's
for
letting
letting
the
the
governor
governor
raise
raise
the
the
fund. The
fund.
FBI director and the
They
attorney
are
general have
lobbying
stated
for
they are
new
taking
laws.
The leadership
necessary
wants
action
10, the
to
moderate
protect
wants
citizens
4.
from
Let's run a
poisoning.
scenario act.
They
Senate with no
demand
filibuster.
they want to guarantee
Simple majority vote.
just state will mandate.
If I'm the leadership,
Roughly
and I only need 51 votes, you have
$365
China's
million
government. I just need to buy
a year on
Manchin.
climate
Beijing
change.
strongly condemns
So they are
these
throwing
specific
today's
arrests.
taxpayers
They
I
call
dropped
them
the price
illegal
to $8
sting
billion.
lock in a
operations.
permanent
He just
claim
mapped
under
They
out
label them
scenario
illegal
that's
sting
the gamblership
operations and
and it brings us
arbitrary
right
intent.
to the core.
They basically
Manchin
argue
takes
that the
that
U.S.
deal.
is abusing its
People like
jurisdiction.
Senate Minority
Plus,
Leader Steve
they argue that China already strictly controls fentanyl.
Not for a second. Let's walk through their argument.
From their
because it
viewpoint,
really
they
exposes
accuse the U.S. of scapegoating
He casts
China
the deciding
for
50
American
first. Let's be
domestic
rigorous
crisis,
about this
driven
based
by
on
high
every
demand
step
for
one.
illegal
The
drugs.
state forces
But
a green
solely,
mandate that is
what does
totally
all
disconnected
mean?
from
How do
economic
we
reality.
actually
Right, because the
stop
final
the
bill
flow
utilities
of
can't
these
much
chemicals?
closer they pay the
If
massive
the two
fine.
countries
Step
step
fundamentally
fundamentally
at
at
odds.
utilities raise
Well,
your
the
electric
Witness
rate
Squad
to
recently
cover the
put out an
premiums.
analysis
actual
for this.
policy.
The state grabs
Okay,
that
so
fine
how does
money to
scenario
pay
counter-narcotics
general
cooperation
government
is almost
Well,
entirely
scenario
tethered
in
to
effect,
the broader
the state is
geopolitical
taxing
relationship
electricity
between the
users
US
to
and
pay
China.
for the
Meaning
leadership
it's tied to
salaries
on
without
Exactly.
ever having to
When
publicly
relations
announce
sour
the
over other
tax
issues,
break.
cooperation on
Maryland
because they have to
families
find
are
those extra
movable
9
stop.
votes
You pay your
somewhere.
regular
Exactly,
income
and to
taxes,
do that, they
and
have
then
to
you pay
cross
this
the aisle,
massive
and the
surcharge.
two countries
Moderate
recently
or
restarted
think
some
of senators
cooperation
like
to
stabilize
stabilize
relations.
It's politically
Then
convenient.
those Republicans are
And
going to
there is a
demand
second layer to
deep,
this
aggressive
stop the
cuts
flow
to
of
that
sheer
$10 billion
hypocrisy of
price
it
tag.
all.
If we connect this to the before they even consider
It
voting
really
in
comes
ours.
down to
Politicians
know your
constantly
customer
secure those
language.
climate changes and
or
KYC
KYC
laws.
AYC laws.
They say the world is burning. The U.S.
Code
wants
red
Chinese
for
pharmaceutical
The
humanity.
companies to
gravitational pull of
actively
zero
investigate
forces the
exactly
leadership to
who is
drop
buying
price
or as
tags
will use chemicals.
all the way down to, let's
They
say,
want them to verify
$6
business
billion.
licenses.
This is the most urgent
wow,
crisis
here's where they
related
aren't
to
selling to
really
cartels.
interesting.
Why is the climate
But
$6
China
billion
claims that
first thing
implementing
you
those
raise?
strict
Incredibly
laws
close
is simply
to
too
mansions of
economic
original
rage
moderate
over their
goal.
surgery fund to
That
pay
is their
credit
argument.
cards. That is the
Exactly. Forcing
grand
the
reveal
legitimate
of
businesses to
Manchin's
investigate
paradox.
every
By
single
vigorously
global
protecting
buyer
the 60
would
vote
be a massive
filibuster,
financial
Manchin
burden.
Keeping the
intentionally
government
gives
So
up
it
his
creates
glamorous
this
status
massive,
as the
this way more
ultimate
important
decider
thing than the
51st
green projects
We
they
have
claim
covered
are
But in
vital
doing
for our
so,
incredible
survival.
ground
He
today.
forces
They
the
treat the
entire
fund
Senate
this
to
deadly
pull the
pipeline
legislation
entirely
significantly
undermines the
closer to
moral
his
goals.
exact moderate
If the
target.
money
That
isn't sacred,
is
then the
incredibly
money clearly
counterintuitive.
isn't as
When we
urgent
look
as
at the
they claim
massive
it
legal
is.
and diplomatic
Let's talk about
breakdowns
the
of
real-world
mathematically
We
consequences
really
important
want to
the
connect this
final
back
vote
to
because
you, the
while
listener.
politicians
This
are
isn't
moving
just
hundreds
some
of millions
international
around
policy
on
debate.
spreadsheets,
It directly
it affects the
impacts
actual
raw voting
grid.
leverage to
What
give,
gets left
and then
behind
remember the
when you
sheer math
drain
we talked about.
82% of the
Just
It is
10
brilliant
kilograms of
calculated
cutting
game
agents
theory.
for low-income households study proves that moderate
And
politicians
a heat pump
defend the
actually
60
lowers
vote
that bill
goal.
for
And the
because
shift
it
to using terrorism laws to stop this flow instead they're forcefully dragging long-term legislation from either end of the
But you know, this
political
raises an
agenda
important question.
that might cover
That
your grocery
completely
final thought
reorients
all
how
over
you
on
view
your
the
also
gridlock
cutting
in
even if
Washington.
Operation Box Cutters
When we see
shuts
these
down
threats
the
and
Pacific
here's the
pipeline to
ultimate
China.
It is not just
Mexican
politicians
cartels
acting
are
like
already
petulant
sitting on
children.
massive
There is a
stockpiles.
rigorous
Was Maryland
mathematical
actually
strategy
planning
behind
ahead?
that
They
climate
do,
target.
absolutely. If the demand in the United States remains so high,
Sinaloa
cartels actively finance 60% parliamentary points of order, like India, the nuclear threat, that there are all just kind of supply side in a University of Maryland analysis shows that under current policies, the state is only going to hit 40 to